Trauma. Everyone has it. No one talks about it. It seems easier to stay silent, ignore it, or stuff it than it does to honor it, learn from it, and finally heal. Trauma is debilitating, yet so often we suffer in silence. Trauma is not meant to be battled alone, and we are no longer going to suffer in silence. Together, we are creating a safe place to speak, to share our stories, and grow our strength as we heal. Together, we are giving a voice to those who have been silenced, bringing darkness into light, and letting God use our stories. Today, we find ourselves again. We relight our spark and let it light up the world. Stop SIS is a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating on issues of trauma and trafficking, as well as the amazing power of the healing journey. Welcome to Stop SIS. Hey, you guys, big welcome back to Stop Suffering in Silence. My name is Denise Walsh. We are here with co-host Rachel Timothy. And I think last time we gave you guys an update on all the things we've been doing, so we don't need to do that again. But next month is our 1-year anniversary for Stop SIS as a nonprofit organization, which is a big stinking deal. We're really excited about that. And so we're going to be creating some fun things and maybe some giveaways and all that kind of stuff to celebrate our year anniversary. So be certain to stay tuned for that. Today, we're going to talk about something I think everybody experiences. Yeah. And it really is kind of the basis of your new book, in my opinion, on how to relieve yourself from these emotional strings that pull us in different directions and really take back that ownership. And so the topic for today's discussion is going to be triggers, like what triggers us. And we all have it. I think some have more than others, right? And a trigger basically just means that something, whether a smell, a sound, a sight, a word, what somebody says, triggers these feelings associated to a past traumatic event. Mm-hmm. And it could literally be anything that could evoke this emotion, anxiety, depression, self-doubt, all of this stuff within our bodies. And we might not even quite know how or why. So, Rachel, if you were to give a definition to trigger, what would it be?
I would say, really what you said was a great definition. Something that comes along that takes you back in your mind to a situation, whether you're feeling it physically, emotionally, and it kind of just pauses life for a second. Everything seems to freeze and you go back to a time where you don't want to be. It's not your choice to go there. And it's hard to explain to people who don't have severe triggers, but it is true. Everybody has them in some way, shape, or form. And, you could honestly even think of triggers in some way, and I could be totally wrong on this, but there could be good triggers. Maybe the smell of a rose reminds you of your grandma, and it takes you back to a memory of when you were sitting with your grandma in her garden. There could be. Am I wrong in that? Or I feel like there could be good triggers.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But when it takes you back to a traumatic event, obviously that's not what you want.
So when you find that a trigger happens, and does it feel like a flashback, or how is it different than a flashback?
Well, sometimes it can trigger a flashback, but I feel like there can be all sorts of different responses to triggers. Everybody's different, and sometimes every day could be different for a person, I think, depending on where you at, maybe in your spiral. It could be the needle that breaks the camel's back, or it could be the start of a spiral. It just depends on where you're at in your healing journey. But for me, with a trigger, there's times when I physically feel it and I don't know what caused it. And it's so frustrating.
So those times you don't have a mental picture. You're not going back in time to a memory, but you like all of a sudden start feeling in your body something change.
Yes, absolutely. And I can be in conversation with you and everything's, feeling great. And then all of a sudden something is said that logically in my mind shouldn't bother me, but my body will almost like hold its breath and my heart will hurt for a second. And it's like I'm in shock for a moment. And then when you think of it again, when you think of it logically, you're like, what is wrong with you? Why are you all of a sudden sad? Like this is silly. And it takes digging into to figure out the root of it.
Okay. So there's a lot of ways that people respond to a trauma or a trigger, right? You could have people become angry. You could have somebody get super anxious. You could have self-doubt. You could have, the fight or flight, like get me out of here, run experience. What are some different ways that people might respond if they experience a trigger?
Yeah, so you could fall into a depression and not really necessarily know why, have an anxiety episode, a dissociative episode where you lose time and you don't know why, anger outbursts, or just start crying and you have no idea why. And it's one of those things where you already feel, I don't want to say crazy because it's not my favorite word, but you feel off anyway. And then when you can't make sense of these emotions that are so heavy, it's really confusing. And let's say you're in the middle of a beautiful day with your family, and all of a sudden you're not okay. How do you stop and explain that to anybody? It's really, really hard.
Would you say that, and I'm sure everybody's a bit different, but that a trigger is typically connected to a memory that like, oh, that's the smell, or oh, this is how, or is it often you really have no idea why all of a sudden you have this sudden anxiety or emotions?
It's a mixture of both. I mean, the more healing you do, that's when you're able to pinpoint it. And then I think when you can pinpoint it, you get a bit more control. But when you haven't done much healing work and you still don't know why you feel the way you feel, then it's much more difficult to connect your brain with your body.
And that why I think this is, and why I connect it to your book, is because if we are, have these emotional strings, meaning our day, our self-worth, our whatever is in the hands of what someone else says or does or whatever, then we are kind of at the whim of the world.
Yeah.
And that doesn't feel good.
No.
That's like in freak out mode most of the time, right? Because
That makes it to where you don't want to leave your house. You want to control everything and you want to put yourself in a bubble.
okay, that's another interesting topic, because if you think of the coping skill of control,
Mm-hmm.
maybe this perfectionism or this need to be like type A, control is really a reflection of the desire to avoid all triggers at all costs.
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of people move into isolation as their first tool of defense. It's a way to keep safe.
Okay. Okay. All right. So step one is to notice that you are being triggered, right? Notice that you're not just sad for no reason or anxious for no reason, or like that there is something happening, whether it's a smell, a sight, somebody said, they're, poking a old wound and you're responding. And so the
Mm-hmm.
first thing is to recognize that that's what's happening and that there is a reason and that wound can be healed.
Yes. I have a great example that I would love to share.
Yeah.
We have a group where can't even remember how many, like over 3,000 people in it, and they will share often their own stories, or they'll, reach out with my story. But a lady had gotten on there and had asked for prayer, and she's a mom and has had a very traumatic past. I believe was trafficked, the way that she explains it, and has a lot of trauma still. But she's a mom and her kids wanted to go to the county fair. And so she, as a mom with your heart for your kids, you want to be able to do this for your kids. So she loads them up and she takes them to the county fair. Almost immediately, her anxiety goes through the roof. Crowds and these unknown people, and seeing her kids being put in rides and being buckled by strangers, and like all of these things started to trigger her past traumatized moments. And she couldn't breathe, and she was trying to keep it together because she wanted this to be a fun time for her kids, and ended up like they left early. She was exhausted. She felt terrible. It ended up not at all being what she had hoped. So she posts about this on this Facebook group. And I'll never forget how there were several people who were like, why in the world would you do that? Why would you take your kids to the county fair if you know you're going to respond that way? That doesn't even make sense. Like, you got to understand a mama's heart, and then the balancing of, how am I going to be able to control my trauma responses? And at the same time, how am I going to be a good mom? Like, knowing triggers are out there, but I still want to live. It's extremely difficult.
Okay. So I think the first mistake, right, is trying to control, right? Because that's just not possible. What we really want to lead people to is into the healing journey. Because as you start to heal, those same things that used to take you off the rails are now, what do we call it? Like a fly on your shoulder. Like they just don't bother you as much. And it's not because they're not there. The goal is to not change the environment to meet my needs, right? The goal is to get as much healing and internal strength as possible. So when life does happen, as it always does, I think it's never smooth sailing all the time, right?
Yes.
That you can handle those ups and downs a bit better. So I think knowing that healing is possible and you don't have to stay captive to those triggers forever is hopefully hope-filled for those who are currently captive to the triggers around them.
I hope so. I mean, I remember being in the spot of not having any hope when it came to triggers. Like, I remember researching and researching. We tried a lot of different things to somehow break some of these triggers because they were destructive for me and my family. And it sounds simple and easy, and I mean, not to say that it necessarily was, but the truth is, when I started to focus on things outside of like when I started doing 90 day and I started to find my purpose and I made other things bigger, the triggers still came, but because my focus, like my zeroing in, was on something else, the trigger kind of felt like just part of my side vision, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. There's two, like, I guess phases, I would say, or two pieces of the seesaw. I don't know what analogy to use there, but I'm really good with analogies in case you haven't figured it out.
That's going to be our third book. Denise's analogies.
We need a t-shirt for some of them. Yes. So, but the goal is like part of it is identifying the trigger and talking through the trigger and why is this the trigger and what does this bring up for me and what does it mean to me when I see this? Like, what is the story surrounding it? Like to get that out of your chest and work through some of that. So you've got the healthier coping skills when you are triggered to start using instead.
Mm-hmm.
But then you're right. The other part of the seesaw is and they're both important. That's why it's like a phase. I don't know. The other part is to train your reticular activating system into focusing on what you want to see in your world, because we all could live in fear, but we don't have to. So if we train our reticular activating system, we're really writing down the things. What do I want to experience today? How do I want my day to go? What do I want to feel? And it's not, again, a flip of the switch, right. But you're right. It does make that bigger. So then when the triggers come, they're less important.
But you can't flip flop them, because if you do, where you're just trying to focus on something else first, right. It's like you're brushing it under the rug, and that is your triggers and your past pain's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. You have to deal with it first, and then start to shift to where your reticular activating system is going a different direction.
So it's like phase 1 and phase 2.
Yeah. Yes.
Both are important. But
Yes.
yes, you're right. Cause you want to process through it, or else they're just going to stay in your body. And that's
Yeah, you don't want to,
right. You
but you
don't.
need to.
Okay. So you don't want to process through them, but there's purpose in that pain.
Yes, absolutely.
So what would you say? Let's talk about those two phases. Phase one, reflecting ownership.
Mm.
And and working through what? Yeah.
That makes sense now. It clicked. Slow reaction time, but yes, you're right. I get what you're going with here.
Yeah. So the first phase is the healing journey phase of identifying what are some things you did during that phase? Because I didn't know you as well then. You had already written your book by the time I met you. You had already done a lot of that healing work. You had counselors in the past. What are some things you did on that phase that helped?
Surrounding myself with people who were supportive and caring and pointing me in the right direction, never giving up. Um, Continuing counseling, even when I didn't want to. Continuing to do the things like go to church and get up each day and take care of myself. Really, it was just a matter of putting one foot in front of the other. I heard so much about this is the way to do things, and this is how you should feel, and this is what you're going to be like when you're healed. And none of it seemed possible. Like, if you were to see my journals from back then, you would have a day written out where it was just angry and sad and depressed and hopeless. And the next day, I'm writing a prayer saying, God, I need you. We can do this. I believe it. And that was the roller coaster ride of what it was like through that journey. And eventually getting to a place where all that was poured into me started to click, started to make sense. And my coping skills that were negative became less, and my positive toolbox became more. But boy, it was not overnight. And it was really just a matter of putting one foot in front of the other, sometimes leaning on other people to get through things, but eventually just saying, I'm not going to live this way. This isn't what I choose.
Okay. So I hear a few things with the healing journey piece. Number one, make some sort of like decision, like, all right, I'm not going to live this way anymore. Like something's got to give. Right. And then you sought out support within your church, within the counseling, within your supports, and you utilize them.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're right. When we're having a bad day or getting into a funk or you're triggered into a depression, we isolate, right? And that's one of the first signs or one of the first things to notice potentially. If you normally hear from someone and now you don't, ask them what's going on. But for you in those moments to say, I need help, or hey, can we go for a walk? Or hey, can we, you sought out support, which is really important. Was telling your story part of your healing journey?
Absolutely. Yeah. It was scary, and the unknown felt extremely scary. And some of the responses were awful, but there's a freedom to it. I don't even know how to explain it, but there is a freedom to saying, this is me. This is my testimony. And this is where God has led me and what has happened. Take it or leave it. Like, here I am.
So telling your story, even not, of course, you eventually started telling your stories in rooms of people, but you first started telling it to your granny and then to your counselors. How helpful was that?
It was like a piece by piece thing. So I don't know how the brain works with a lot of things, but when I was able to verbalize a flashback, it was as if it would then move to a memory and I would be able to remember it then like I do any other memory. Whereas when it was a flashback, if I didn't somehow get it out, it would continue to replay like a movie reel going over and over again, going back and feeling it and reliving it. And so I learned that either speaking it or writing it was super important, and having people there to say, man, this sucks. Like, I am so sorry you went through this. This should have never happened to you. That was super empowering too, because that's often not the words you're saying to yourself. Often what you're saying is, you were so dumb. Why did you allow that to happen? Like, come on. So when you hear other people say, I believe you, I'm here, you're not crazy. It's super empowering, but also you're moving it to a different part of your brain. And that's the healing journey.
Mhm. So the first phase is reflecting ownership. It's sharing your story. It's starting to get it out of your body. And even the act of speaking, you guys, impacts you on a cellular level. And you're right, it shifts your brain. It puts it from the frontal lobe into the memory, and it doesn't have to control you anymore. But it's that, that's why I keep saying seesaw, even though it's not, because it's like, while you're doing that, also,
This is a really neat seesaw.
you're gonna have to like find something. Speaking of carnivals, like what ride could this like become? I don't know. While you're sharing your story, you're also practicing more positive coping skills, healthier habits. That when, again, like the healthy habits don't change your feelings immediately,
Right.
but over time they do. So like, it's even if you don't feel good, you're not staying in bed all day, you're taking a shower, you're making it to your appointments, even if you don't really want to, because that's the healthy choice.
Yeah, we have one survivor right now who has just really started to share her story kind of publicly. And it's interesting because she reached out to me and was just saying, I think I maybe did this too soon because I'm getting responses that are not nice and I'm having to deal with it. And you're right. Like it's painful at times, but the strength that she's gaining now to be able to say, no, I know my truth. You can disagree and that's on you, but I know my truth. And so now she can respond and she's gaining strength from that. So I think telling your story, it comes with difficulties that you need almost like a growing process to get even further in your healing journey.
And there will never be like a perfect time where now like nobody, because there's people in this world who are rude regardless. Yeah.
Or that just don't understand.
Yeah. And they
that
never
just
will.
can't wrap their head around this stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe they care, maybe they, do love you and they whatever, but this is just not something that they can even process.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think speaking of triggers, before we move on to phase 2 of this seesaw that we're on.
Is this like the scrambler? Where are we? I don't know.
Yeah, I live on that thing. I feel like boundaries are important, and knowing when you need a boundary to help you with a trigger to maybe not go through a trigger that is going to derail you. Also knowing when it is important to go ahead and face the trigger.
Yeah.
So boundaries is a piece of this as well, and not apologizing for it, because if that situation's not safe for you, it's not safe for you. End of story, whether people understand or not.
I think that's, again, a really interesting thing to think about. And I know we talked about it a little bit earlier this week, is we feel a trigger and then we have to decide, right? Is this a trigger that needs healing and I actually am safe?
Right.
Or am I stinking out of here? Like, get me out of here because this is not safe. Right. And I think that is something like that intuitive piece is something to wrestle with, because I had a girl say that a piece of 90-Day U-Turn was offensive to her and she wants to quit. When, we've had hundreds of ladies go through it and have great results, right? Mm-hmm. And so it reminded me that obviously she was triggered in some way. And her reaction is to say, get me the heck out of here. Mm-hmm. When, in fact, this is truly a safe place to even talk through that trigger. And I gave her the opportunity to do so. So we'll see what happens. But I know there's been times where I've been triggered and I've had to decide, is this my gut telling me to get the heck out of here? Or is this something I need to work through?
Right. And then sometimes we label people bad because they triggered us, when in really, they can't walk on eggshells all the time and know everybody's trigger all the time. It doesn't mean that person's bad or unsafe necessarily. It is a trigger you need to work through.
Right. How the heck do we differentiate?
Yeah, for real.
That's the $1 million question. Like, if we could come up with a resource for that.
I feel like that's why we're always learning and always I mean, we can have all of our memories in our mind, but our reactions to each one are different. And then different triggers we respond different ways. Different people, we respond different ways. That's why I need everything to just be black and white so that I can know. Because oftentimes some of my triggers that I want to avoid are because I don't like the person that I become when I am triggered. I don't want to become 9 years old around people that I'm friends with. I hate it. And then shame follows. And so I want to avoid any situation that is going to create me into a 9-year-old until I can get that fixed. Help.
So if you're feeling triggered, I think these are the, like, number one, you taking a step back and looking at it in more of analytical kind of way. When you're in emotion mind, you're in it and you're feeling it, and this is the truth, and but when you can take a step back and you can analyze it, I think then it gives you a chance to say, what is the trigger? What just happened? What is the story I'm telling myself? Like, where is this taking me back to? And then using your healthy coping skills, am I safe here? And then you can go to those people that you trust and maybe even ask for their thoughts. Is this something that I should set a boundary in, or is this something that I get to work through? Now, we do coach our survivors quite a bit around family, around perpetrators, and we would say there is zero reason to hang out with a perpetrator. Like, I don't know that I'm all about forgiveness. But I do not think you need to put yourself in a situation where you're hanging around somebody who did abuse you. Like, to me, that's not safe for you. So absolutely, there are reasons for boundaries. And you have to, there are times where you're going to have to do that.
Yeah. And I think to define too, when you say it's not a safe situation, it doesn't necessarily mean physically unsafe. It can mean emotionally unsafe for you, or like there would be times I would go ahead and put myself in a triggering situation with people, and then I would be out of it for a week, not functioning, can't be the mom that I want to be because of it. And so like it's weighing the pros and cons with that and realizing until I can get myself together with these triggers, this boundary is going to have to stay up.
Right. So I would never want to say to somebody who's triggered around a perpetrator, like, oh, you just need to heal your trigger. Like, no, that's an unsafe person. You are absolutely allowed to have boundaries around people who have crossed yours in the past.
Absolutely. And do not be sorry for it.
Right.
Like, yeah.
Right.
And people who don't understand it, just.
Well, we don't need anyone else's permission to live our lives, period. So they don't need to know, and it's not about them at all. So I think you just get to decide your healthiest version. But then sometimes we're triggered and we want to get the heck out of here when it really is a safe place. And there wasn't malice intent, or it was, a situation that really maybe even had nothing to do with you, but it triggered something within you. And so so what would somebody do in an acute spot like that?
I have a story with it. Can I share a story?
Sure.
And then I'll answer your question. I'll never forget. I had been working with the FBI on different situations, and I was being triggered a lot. I was very much in chaos mind. And I remember there was a advocate, I believe, for the FBI, and her and I were communicating quite a bit, and she was really trying to encourage me to trust the system. And I remember her having a conversation with me, and I was just in panic mode. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel safe sharing my story. And it really wasn't because they were unsafe. It's because I knew how unsafe other people were towards me. But I couldn't explain that to somebody. It just didn't feel like I was triggered to feel unsafe. And saying that to her, her response was, have I ever done anything to hurt you? Well, no. Then why in the world would you feel unsafe with me? Well, like at that point, I can't explain anything to you because I get it. Logically, you are not the bad person here. But there's a lot more to it. Like if that's the tip of the iceberg, like you often say, there's a whole lot more to it as to why I feel the way that I feel in that moment. And that whole thing fell apart as a result of me not being able to communicate what I was feeling triggered on. I just wanted to share that story with you. I have no idea what your question was again. I forgot.
I don't remember either. It was about what do you do in the acute moments of being triggered?
Yeah.
And I think one step is to communicate as best you can. So we've learned and we need to learn that piece of the brain. It starts at the B that turns off when you are experiencing trauma and you cannot speak. Like there's a piece of your brain that's like, I physically cannot get the words out. It doesn't make any sense. So we know that writing can help.
Mm-hmm.
And again, at that acute moment, it's like doubling down on your coping skills, even if you don't feel like it.
One thing you taught me was prepare for it. Like have a patent line to be prepared to speak, because when you are kind of in your unconscious mind at that point, you need to have something that you can just say easily.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that trauma triggers are the same, but I have a 12-year-old. I'm like, holy cow, there's a lot of insecurity here. And any little thing can evoke this fear of not being good enough, or this, this anger, or just like, oh yeah, hey, I mean, teenagers, preteens, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we're going to do with him is Brandon, my husband, is going to start taking walks with him, just one-on-one about whatever, just to have more one-on-one time. And we like walks because they're non-threatening. It's not like staring at each other. And so he's going to intentionally do that. And then we decided that we were going to practice. So if he's being teased or if something's happening, we're going to practice standing up for yourself. We're going to practice just letting it roll off and like joke about it. And we're going to practice ignoring it.
Yeah.
Those are the 3 things that we're going to do to help him in middle school. But it reminds me of that acute kind of fight or flight freaking out. And you're right. Our brains often don't work immediately.
Yeah.
And practicing is huge.
Practicing is huge. Recognizing, practicing, and then executing.
Ooh,
on the seesaw.
On a scrambler.
Scramble.
I don't know. That's a bad one. We'll have to find one that works. So, okay. I think this is a good conversation. I think that it's good to know what typically triggers you. Would you say that over the years, the things that trigger you have gone down, or have you just learned to navigate it better? How would you see the healing journey supporting you? And
probably a mixture of both. Like there's still times when I'll feel that. For me, it's literally just a pain all of a sudden in my chest for most of the time. Now I have, as far as like emotional triggers, and then the repeated words of lies from Satan. And I think I recognize it sooner now, and I'm able to put it in its place, sometimes within seconds, sometimes within hours. But at least I know a bit more about why it's there, and that's not truth. And it takes a little bit to get my mind and my body reconnected again and on the same page, that I am safe. This person is safe. This is a very good situation. Everything is fine.
Yeah.
It just takes time.
Yeah. When you do your grounding exercises or like.
Yes. Gratitude is huge for me right now. That is a big one to get me back on track.
Yeah. Being outside, getting your daily dose of vitamin. What is it? D? Is it D from the sun?
I think it's D.
Vitamin D. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I need my recharge with the sun.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. And those are the coping skills. So, those are the healthy habits that I think when you do them consistently, when you do have a flare up or a trigger point, you're more apt to like double down on them because you already are doing them. When you're in negative coping skills and you're using drugs or drinking or cutting or eating disorder, right? You have to, you can imagine when you're being triggered, you double down on those.
Yes.
And that is where the negative spiral comes. And so recognizing that and being able to start using your positive coping skills is key.
It's key. And I hope that anybody listening to this recognizes that triggers are not something to be ashamed of.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no reason to feel shame. There's no reason to be angry at yourself because of how your body is reacting to a situation. Yes, it sucks. Yes, it's frustrating. Maybe it puts other people out in a sense. I know that's how I feel oftentimes when I struggle. I feel like I'm a terrible mom, wife, friend, but really it is just part of the process. And there's nothing wrong with you.
Our brains and our bodies are powerful.
Yes.
And there's a reason why. I mean, it's a healing journey, not a healing moment.
Truth.
And then one other thing I want everyone to do as we close today is look back and see just how far you've come. Because I think, again, in the midst of it, we can feel like we're never going to get better. And then as we do get better, we don't even really realize how cool we are. And so you can think back, like, when was the last time I was triggered? Sometimes it's twice a week, but, sometimes it's twice a year. And that's pretty dang cool. So remember to look back and give yourself a pat on the back when you've noticed that there's been longer and longer and longer times in between these triggered moments.
Yep, for sure.
So anything you want to add before I end here?
I don't think so. I think it was a good conversation though, because it's one that we have often with our girls, our survivors going through things, just processing another trigger.
Yeah.
Never fun, but it's necessary.
I always bring coffee to our conversations because it feels like good conversation in a coffee shop, and then I talk.
Aw, so cute too.
Okay, I just asked good old Google, which I declare I should do, and they popped one up, and I think this is like perfect. Are you kidding me? It's always so good. Never a coincidence. That's what I say. All right, so here we go. I declare that I am calm and peaceful. I do not let people or circumstances upset me. I rise above every difficulty, knowing that God has given me the power to remain calm. I choose something. I choose to live my life happy, bloom where I'm planted, and let God fight my battles. This is my declaration, and this is my declaration for you. That was so good.
That was perfect.
Have an awesome night, you guys, or day, and thanks so much for being here. We will see you next week.
Thank you so much for listening to this powerful episode of Stop Suffering in Silence. If you are interested in booking Rachel to speak at your school, your church, or on your podcast, then please email openblindeyes@protonmail.com. If you are interested in sponsoring a survivor on their healing journey and would like to donate to Stop SIS, then please check out the link in the description box or show notes below, or you can email stopsis@protonmail.com. And finally, if you are currently suffering in silence, or you know somebody who is, whether they're dealing with a current trauma or one from the past, then we will always recommend that you reach out to your local resources and find a counselor that you can trust, because nobody is meant to suffer alone. Have an amazing week, and thank you for being here.